Welcome back to the Code and Bootstrapping podcast. Today we have a guest, and this is one of my friends and actually mastermind partner, Julien. And today we're going to talk about how he got into programming and what he's doing now and what you can learn from him. Hey, Julien, how's it going?
Hi, Matt. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's great to have someone else on the podcast. So I guess, can you just introduce yourself really quickly since nobody knows who you are yet?
Yeah, so I'm Julien from France. I've been a developer for 5, 6 years. And for the past 2 years, I've been really into blockchain. And like Mark, I'm also teaching development online. I have my YouTube channel, EatTheBlocks, where I teach blockchain and Ethereum. Yeah.
Cool. Actually, this is a good jumping point. So you, like me, you were not a programmer from the beginning. Like, you had a whole other career before that. So let's start with that. Like, what'd you do before you got into programming?
Yeah, that's right. So actually, when I was still a student, around like in 2005, 2006, I was in college, and programming wasn't as sexy as now. There was still some bad stereotype. So I think because of that reason, I didn't want to be a programmer at that time. So I started as a in the world of finance, and I worked in finance for a couple of years. But I got sick of dealing with numbers all the time and be so focused on just money. And on the side, I started to have a look at programming and technology, and I find myself very interested in this. So
What was it that got you interested in it? Like, what, like, going back to those early days, like, what was it that drew you to programming at the beginning?
I think there was, I felt like programmers had some sort of magical power that other people didn't have. For most career, you have to rely on skills such as relationship with other people, like some soft skills in general. But what I really like about programming is that if you study it, if you train, then you can get really good at it, and it's almost certain that it's going to work. So I really enjoy this. Also, another thing that really seduced me at the time is that, so at that time I was living in Hong Kong, and I was trying to find a way to stay in Asia long term. um, and so there wasn't any really good career path that I could see that would allow me to do this. But
Were
with
you still in the finance industry, or did you quit first and then look at your options?
I quit first, and then I moved here to Taiwan to learn Chinese without really having an idea of what I would do.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I wasn't even sure that I would be a developer, or yeah, I just had no idea. And then here I met a programmer that was doing the digital nomad thing, and that taught me about all these things. And I was really blown away because coming from the finance industry, like being something doing something like digital nomadism is really not something you
Yeah,
can do.
I can imagine that HR would have some problems with that.
Yeah, you don't call your bank like, hey, Dutch bank, yeah, I'm working from Bali today. Is that okay? Like, I don't think it's quite high. So of course, the money in programming is less than in finance, but for me, that was more than offset by the freedom that you could get from living wherever you wanted. So yeah, I think for me that was one of the killer argument. Yeah.
And what programming language did you start with, and how long did it take before you could build anything that was useful, even just yourself?
So actually, the guy who recommended me to jump into programming at that time, he was a PHP/WordPress developer. So naturally, I started by this.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it's really good for beginners. And at that time, I had a roommate that had a project with a client to do a very simple website. And I told him that I've been studying PHP and WordPress for a week. And then all of a sudden he told me out of the blue, hey, Julien, hey, do you want to work for this project? So that was my first project. The pay was ridiculously low. It took me months. It was ridiculous.
Wait, and that was just 1 week after starting? That's pretty amazing.
But I was really scared, and I did all the typical mistake. Like I went on a theme forest, and I bought a very complicated theme, and it was absolutely impossible to use that to develop. But the point is, at that time, I made the jump, and that's very important. So when you're getting started, a lot of time you don't really know when is this moment when you can go professional. But the truth is, you're never going to feel really ready. So it's good if you have some external force that really push you a little bit and force you to take action.
So in that 1 week before you got hired, how were you learning it? Were you going through some online videos, or did you have a book on it? Or, I mean, this is fascinating to me because I used WordPress actually as a blog for years before I learned any basic amount of CSS, because I wanted to customize things, then gradually some JavaScript and very, very little PHP. But just going from nothing to even an entry level job you weren't ready for is amazing. Were you just cramming it 24/7 that week, or what were you doing?
Thank you. Well, I was just Googling things, and I found a lot of stuff on a SitePoint at the time. I didn't find many video because I think at the time video tutorials weren't as big as today. The learning resources were not really for developers, but more like for advanced users. So this was a little
Gotcha.
bit annoying. Later that year, I found out about Jeffrey Way and Laracast. And
Yeah, I've watched those.
yeah, so once I found this guy, then I was even more motivated because I was able to learn stuff from an advanced professional. So that was really cool. But before that, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just trying to piece together some snippet that I found online, and somehow it worked. Yeah, but that was back in the days. I don't think that someone starting now would necessarily would naturally start with PHP and WordPress. Maybe people now they will want to start with front end. I don't know.
I don't know. 'Cause, I mean, I keep thinking that, but I've been thinking that forever, and WordPress's market share just keeps growing. So it's hard to say. I guess it probably just depends on what world you're in. What year was that, by the way?
This was in 2014. Yeah.
Okay. And now in 2019, you're working as a contract blockchain dev. And as you said, you're teaching some of those skills online. Tell me a bit about how you got interested in blockchain and how you made the jump, because I mean, PHP to blockchain developers is not one of the more common ones.
So I think that very early on, I understood that with PHP and WordPress, I will have some difficulty in getting some really good clients and some really good jobs, because there is a sort of a social stigma among developers when you use PHP and WordPress. So I don't want to go into a discussion of is it a bad technology or not? Of course, it's been used by many companies. It's very useful. It's very productive. But the fact is that a lot of people, good employers with money, who think that if you do a lot of PHP, then you must not be a good developer, and so they will not be willing to pay you well. So strategically, you got to be careful about this.
Yeah, I struggled with the same thing in 2013 a bit, because I was all in on JavaScript, and a lot of people, especially then, just kind of had this idea that, well, that's just a scripting language. If you want to get real work done, you use Java or .NET or something like that. So
yeah, I understand. And especially when you're a young developer, you don't have any prior experience and you don't really understand these things, it's very easy to influence you. So it's very useful if you can get some wisdom from a senior programmer who can give you this info.
Hmm.
It really prevent you from wasting a lot of time.
Yeah. Oh, and also just see what else is out there. So I guess you were looking for better clients,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
a lot of like stereotypical WordPress clients or PHP clients aren't the greatest. So
Yeah.
you identified blockchain as maybe someplace with particularly good client work opportunities.
Yeah. So actually, what is a little bit like this, but in between there was another sequence where so I used to work for this e-commerce website for about 2 years, and that was PHP and WordPress, and I
Hmm.
was well paid, but I had a feeling that I was just lucky, and sometime it would end. So I was preparing the future, and so I started to check out JavaScript and React at that time, and in 2016, totally by chance on Hacker News, I found this link about Ethereum and the DAO. So Ethereum is the most popular blockchain for building application, and the DAO was a famous application on the blockchain that was a distributed investment fund, and this application was hacked. And so as I was reading the article, I found it really fascinating to discover all these crazy terms like a decentralized investment fund, the blockchain, the hack of hundreds of millions of virtual currency. So from that time, I started to be really obsessed with blockchain. I read everything I could. Um, and I really believed at that time that it would be the future of a part of the internet. So yeah, I was looking forward to get into this industry, um, but I didn't have enough experience. So then I remember how I find my first customer with PHP and WordPress, which is basically I used to teach PHP and WordPress in meetups here in Taipei.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Yeah. And so
Interesting.
my technique was to learn just one lesson in advance. Then I
Hmm.
would teach it. Then the next week I will do the same thing. And I used to repeat like this for 6 months. And yeah, that's how I met the guy who hired for the e-commerce website. So that was very, very successful. And so I thought, maybe I can do a new iteration on this, but not just locally, but maybe online. So then I created EatTheBlocks. Originally, it was to showcase my skills to be hired, but after that, I also had the idea that it could be monetized. Yeah.
Gotcha. Interesting. So you were already teaching Ethereum or blockchain technology in general on
Yeah. So
YouTube.
at the beginning, it was on the original idea was for blockchain in general, but as I got to understand blockchain better, very quickly I understood that most people they were not interested in the blockchain technology itself, but they were interested in building application on top of the blockchain. So that's what we call dApps,
Gotcha.
DAPP. Yeah. So I shifted the focus a little bit. So on dApp and in particular Ethereum dApps, because Ethereum is the best blockchain for that. Um,
And you started the online teaching before you actually started working as an Ethereum dev as your job. Is that right?
yeah. This is correct. Yeah.
Gotcha. So yeah, that's probably something a lot of developers in the audience are interested in because you started off in a completely different industry and then you taught yourself PHP and now you're doing Ethereum and blockchain development, and that's a lot of new skill acquisition. So things have changed a bit since you first got into it, but if you had a friend that was just now getting into programming, or maybe one who had experience but wanted to target a different kind of development, what advice would you give them in how to get started and go about picking up the new skill?
So I'll try to think long term.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the advice that you will find online, they are too focused on try to catch some hype.
Mm-hmm.
But if you invest in some hype, it's going to be your investment is going to be very short-lived. So you want to invest in something that's going to still be there in 5-10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So keep this principle whenever you hear any advice. So then if you want, so you have this sort of paradox at the beginning. On the one hand, you have many different things to learn if you want to be able to be productive and do something. But on the other hand, if you scatter yourself too much, then it's going to be very difficult to sell yourself on your CV. So what I recommend you is study superficially many different things
Mm-hmm.
related to web programming, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and a little bit of server-side stuff, how to set up a simple website. But on your CV, the way you present yourself to the world, focus on one very specific thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good advice. Especially the just getting the basic coverage. Well, actually, I agree with all the advice. I think that's wonderful advice. Having a one deeper skill, and especially having one thing that you're offering to the market, I think is gives you way better odds. But there's some things where if you're like, well, what's a style sheet? You might miss that web development job that your
Yeah.
resume looked like you were perfect for.
Yeah, and but this means making choices and saying no. For example, one of the choices I've made in the past is remove PHP and WordPress from my CV. I
Mm-hmm.
know PHP and WordPress very well, but I don't even mention it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense from a resume standpoint. Um, yeah, so yeah, that's actually really useful, and I think this is about the end of the stuff I wanted to ask you. But as long as you're here, maybe you could tell everyone about what you're working on. You've got a new course coming up, I've heard, and that way anyone who's interested in it can go check it out.
Yeah, so actually I was talking of specializing in something to sell yourself better. And blockchain is actually one way to do that. So what I teach on my channel, EatTheBlocks, is how to build decentralized application on the Ethereum blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to my channel, you'll find a ton of free resources, free video. And if you want to go even deeper, I also have a course where we build 30 decentralized applications. So that's the biggest course you will find on blockchain. And I also have a course coming up where we're going to build a decentralized exchange for ERC-20 token. So probably that some of you are not following here, but you can Google what it is. This is basically like a marketplace on the blockchain. This is really cool. And I have a little community on Telegram, so all of my students, they're able to talk, and yeah, there is pretty good atmosphere. It's pretty cool.
Can people find all of that from your site?
Yeah. So if they go to eattheblocks.com, they can register to a free 7 days email course where I give general career advice. And from there, we can engage discussion.
All right. EatTheBlocks.com.
Yeah,
I'll
like eat
do it.
something.
Yes. Blocks like blockchain blocks that you're stacking.
Yeah.
Yep.
You got it.
I'll put a link to it in the description. And thanks for your time, Julien.
Yeah, thanks, Bach.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.